I am convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mass Effect and Dark Souls are the exact same game. If you've already figured this out, fantastic. If you haven't, then let's talk about it. Sure, they may be set in completely different genres. Mass Effect is a sci-fi adventure that spans the entire galaxy, while Dark Souls is a medieval fantasy which takes place over eons of time. Despite the different settings, the overall plot for these games are very similar because they both center around cycles of destruction, and even each installment in each series serves the same purpose in pushing the narrative forward. First, let me clarify exactly what I am talking about here. The plots that I'm going to look at are for the base Mass Effect trilogy, so Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3, and the basic Dark Souls trilogy, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, including all DLCs and all that, but I won't be looking at Andromeda or Elden Ring or Bloodborne, because those don't apply here. But taking a look at the plots of the ME series and the Dark Souls series, both center around a larger cycle of destruction while placing the player in a niche conflict that has grander implications on the entire story. So what I mean by that is each game has its overarching cycle of destruction that is going on, or a cycle of change, and then the actual game takes place in a smaller cycle that often is a product of the bigger cycle. And from uncovering things in the smaller cycle, we get to have an impact on the greater cycle or even change the world entirely. So if we look at Mass Effect, we have Commander Shepard racing across the galaxy, challenging friends and foes to stop the mythical Reapers from invading and harvesting all advanced life. This cycle has repeated countless times, with each fallen civilization leaving clues and data for those that rise out of the ashes of the harvest. As we find out later, at the end of Mass Effect 3, this harvest cycle is actually a result of a greater cycle of uprising caused by advanced civilizations creating tools to help them work, and these tools becoming sentient and eventually outdoing the creators, and conflict arises. The Reapers were created to solve this conflict or this problem, which they did by starting the harvest. And now Shepard has a chance to end the horror once and for all, join it, or find a new way out. Likewise, the unnamed cursed ones in the Dark Souls trilogy are drawn to the First Flame to decide whether to continue with a sacrificial rekindling in order to continue the Age of Fire. This fire, though, was supposed to have died out long ago, but the rekindled flame burns against the will of fate. As the beings of light clutch to the fading rays of their power and glory, the player can become another sacrifice or attempt to break the accursed cycle of light and dark entirely. So as we can see, both games operate in terms of smaller cycles and larger cycles. ME1 has a smaller cycle of the harvest, with a backdrop of a greater cycle of uprising with AI and technology, while Dark Souls has the smaller cycle of rekindling this first flame, while the overarching cycle of light and dark hangs in the distance. Both protagonists seek to extend their current stage while having the option based on previous decisions to end the greater cycle altogether, forcing the player to make world-altering choices. Now that we have the similarities of the plot laid out before us, we can jump into the games specifically to see how each installment pushes this narrative forward at each stage. So the first installments of Mass Effect and Dark Souls use a more broadly focused journey to introduce the stage of the cycle the world is currently in, while highlighting the dread of what the next stage will bring in order to justify an extension of the current situation. So Mass Effect pits Commander Shepard and the Alliance crew of the Normandy against an elusive antagonist, Saren. Saren is an elite operative called a Spectre, who functions outside of the law to carry out high-level military and political missions. However, an ancient mythical alien called Sovereign has indoctrinated Saren, forcing the Spectre to prepare the way for a full invasion of the Reapers. While Shepard is able to stop Saren and Sovereign's plans, the Alliance crew discovers they only have delayed the inevitable cycle of the Reaper harvest that has carried out for eons. And despite their best attempts, this cycle will continue. In a near identical fashion, Dark Souls 1 has this broad focus on a chosen undead at the twilight of the Age of Fire. The once great civilizations created by beings of light are crumbling as the Age of Darkness edges closer. In an attempt to prolong the power of the First Flame, the chosen undead is drawn to merge with the flame, rekindling the Age of Fire. However, the fire will fade again, and this cycle of sacrifice will continue. So both of these opening games set up the different cycles of the world in a manner that supports extending the current stage of existence, because the destruction that would occur otherwise would be catastrophic. Thus, the player is inclined to extend the cycle. Also, both games have you fight a being of the next stage of the cycle, which directly relates to the next game. In Dark Souls, we fight Menace. In ME, it is Sovereign, and in both cases, there are difficulties that arise from the defeat of these entities. This leads us right into the sequels, which narrow the scope of the story in order to show the consequences of extending the cycle, while hinting at a way to change the world by breaking the cycle entirely. So Mass Effect 2 reveals a new threat, the Collectors. The Collectors are an alien species that live on the outskirts of the galaxy, but have recently decided to abduct entire colonies of humans, with Shepard brought back from the dead by a suspect company named Cerberus, led by the Elusive Man. The Normandy crew races across the galaxy once again to uncover the mystery of the Collectors. In the final mission, Shepard learns the abducted humans are being used as organic material to create a new Reaper. With Sovereign destroyed, the Reapers lost their ability to jump behind the Alliance's defenses, forcing a lengthier direct assault. However, if this new Reaper was created, they would possibly regain this foothold in Alliance space. Shepard eventually disables the Infant Reaper and is left with one final choice: destroy the Collector base and all its data on the incoming invasion, which would push the Harvest back once more, or leave it intact for the Elusive Man to investigate the possibility of controlling the Reapers and thus breaking the cycle of Harvest altogether. Unfortunately, either choice is futile, because the arrival of the Reapers is inevitable. Similarly, Dark Souls 2 explores the consequences of relighting the fire and defeating Menace in the Abyss. After several repetitions of relighting the flame, the one who sacrifices himself to the first flame has become a coveted position, marked with a crown and a throne. However, this cycle sees the arrival of the Shards of Menace, who manifest chaos as the queens of the local lords. These queens, especially the main antagonist, Nashandra, seek the power of the Eternal Flame to consume it and bring about the Age of Darkness. Guided by a mysterious figure, Aldea, the bearer of the curse claims the throne for himself. However, the new champion is given a choice as well: assume the throne and continue to extend the fire, or walk away and seek a way to break the curse of sacrifice entirely. Unfortunately, either choice is futile, because the accursed rekindling is inevitable. Thus, both entries take a look at the implications of the first game's actions. This zoomed-in perspective almost makes these follow-up entries appear as filler, or even separate entries entirely, because they don't really appear to address or even affect the bigger picture. However, both of these world-building installments do introduce the possibility of breaking the respective smaller cycles, which would have severe implications of the overarching plot of each universe. They also both kind of introduce this guiding figure, who is the one to propose this possible third option. You have Aldea, who guides the Cursed One to the end and gives him the option to walk away from the throne. This is almost an exact parallel to the Elusive Man, who gives Shepard the option to control the Reapers instead of continuing to find a way to destroy them. With these marginal but significant plots out of the way, we can finally talk about the final installments of each series, which bring the smaller and greater cycles crashing together. However, this last journey uncovers new information about the nature of the cycles, which subverts the precedent set in the initial game. With these twists, the protagonist is offered a myriad of choices designed to question if your views have changed since the first game. Is extending the cycle worth it, or is the cycle necessary? Is breaking away into the unknown the right choice? Well, in Mass Effect 3, the harvest begins as the Reapers make a full-scale invasion. At the end of the game, Shepard learns the harvest is part of this larger cycle that we talked about of AI uprising. The created always surpass the creator, which causes a conflict. The Reapers were created to harvest advanced organic and mechanical civilizations just as this outbreak of violence began, and assimilate their cultures into new Reapers. Bravely wounded and barely clinging to life, Shepard is faced with the reality that completing his mission and destroying the Reapers would end the cycle of harvest, but may lead to even more violence and destruction because the greater cycle of uprising would be untempered. Maybe the cycle is needed. The Elusive Man was correct. The Reapers can be controlled. By giving up humanity and becoming a Reaper himself, Shepard could continue the harvest, but on different terms. Yet there is one final option: synthesis. At the cost of all individual free will, Shepard could create a new life form from every being in the galaxy. By merging every organic with technology and every machine with organics, this new species would transcend the cycle of uprising. Is that a decision Shepard should or could make on behalf of all life, or is it exactly what the Reapers want? The best way forward is no longer as clear as in the first game, but a choice must be made, or all is for nothing. Following right along this, Dark Souls 3 looks at the final outcome of unnaturally extending the Age of Fire so many times. With every rekindling being less and less powerful, lords of the various thrones have stopped making the sacrifice to the first flame. As the world crumbles into darkness without a flame, the unkindled is awoken to force the lords to complete their duty. As more lore pieces fall into place, it's no longer clear if the Age of Darkness is a terrible thing for the undead or humanity as a whole. Sure, the remaining beings of the light that remain would be cast aside, but there's a good chance humanity stands to wield great power in the new age. Standing above the embers of the first flame once more, should the protagonist rekindle the flame like the first game, or let it go out? The flame would eventually return when the Age of Darkness comes to an end, so what's the point? Aldia's words from the second game remind us of a possible third option. If the unkindled one embraced the power of the Dark Soul, what would happen if they also absorbed the power of the first flame? With the ability to wield both light and dark, the unkindled one could walk into a new era of gray, but at what cost? While these final installments deliver on the promises made at the beginning of the series, they shed new light on the situation in order to change the player's view on what's going on. In Mass Effect 1, right, we're promised of this Reaper invasion and the harvest, and we are so hellbent on ending it as the point of the entire series, but then at the end, we are shown that the cycle may have some benefits if carried out correctly or maybe even differently. Same thing in Dark Souls, we are sort of promised this end of the Age of Fire or this possibility of this Age of Darkness, and at the end we finally get a chance to bring in this Age of Darkness or even a new world entirely. So not only do they try to subvert your initial thoughts on what's going on, they also give you a chance to break free of chains that were never even noticed in the first games. Now that we have ran through all the different installments of this series, hopefully I've shown how each game sort of brings out a particular part of each cycle and how these cycles interact. ME1 has you very focused on the harvest, but by ME3, the harvest is actually a part of a greater cycle of uprising, and we have a chance to stop it. In Dark Souls 1, we are shown that there is this fire that needs to be relit, or all of the Age of Fire will come to an end, and at first that seems pretty bad, but by Dark Souls 3 we kind of get this hint that the Age of Darkness may be good for man. It may even be the best thing for humanity, but would that not just bring about another Age of Fire after the Age of Darkness, and the cycle would repeat? Is it even worth doing anything, or could we break away and do something new? Would that even be worth the cost? So on a whole, with these cycles interacting, we see that by our choices made in this smaller cycle, by the end we are able to make a choice that affects the greater cycle, and that's why these games are so interesting, because while we are going through these smaller journeys, we are learning about the greater consequences of the world and how we can affect them. And I think that's what makes these games so powerful, and why I probably like both of them, and maybe why you watching are still here, and maybe that'll shed some light on why you like both of these series. Also, if you have not tried one of these series, but you like one of them, they're, like I just said, they're the same game, so just go try out the other one. If you're in it for the plot, I think you'll get through it just fine, because they are the exact same, and I think you will like them. So that is my case, that Mass Effect and Dark Souls are literally the same game, and they do the same things with each installment to carry out a fantastic plot and story. I don't know if this era of storytelling was just amazing, or if these two stories were just looking over each other's shoulders to try to copy some info, but looking back at it, now that I've played both in their entirety, they do seem very similar, and I am not mad about it. This is fantastic. I love this type of story. Maybe this is even a great way to tell a story. If you ever want to tell your own, maybe start here. I don't know, but thank you all if you are still here for watching. I will hope to see you in the next one, and I hope you have a great rest of the week or day. Bye.